to the Survey of British Literature. I'm Thelma English. Welcome to session 9. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that you are following us along in our education, that we could enjoy the best. I thank you for these families who've chosen to do the better, harder thing to learn British literature. And I pray that you would bless my voice, that I could continue for this class for session 9. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I've been out and about and out in the grass, and I'm coughing because of it. So don't worry if I use lots of my throat spray. That's just how I get through lectures. Session 9, we are all about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is going to be very exciting today. Our Imitation of Christ devotion, whoever volunteered last week, this is time for you to read share the devotion with us, please. And if you are studying this alone, then read it out loud for yourself right now. Pause the video and read it out loud for yourself. All right, let's continue. Make sure that you get a volunteer for next week, or if you are alone studying British Lit alone, then I suggest choosing your sample sometime during this week, read it aloud, and then read it aloud to yourself next week in class. Session 9, you're turning in your Canterbury Tales today. They need to be all printed up and done. I advise you not to be emailing these to your teacher, because then your teacher has to print them all up, and you may lose part of the formatting if you have different operating systems. Sometimes students email me their assignments and they don't look at all like what they want them to look, or the numbers disappear or something like that, and it causes me a great amount of work. And you do have to lose some credit if you are going to rush home today after class and finish your assignment and send it in at midnight tonight. It is not fair to the others who turn their papers in person today. So do turn your paper in, your real paper, get it turned in today. We'll be looking today at pagan elements and Christian ethics in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is Arthurian literature, part of the King Arthur cycle of literature, which is not solid at all. When we think of the events in the life of King David, we know a lot about King David from the Bible. We have all types of information about him, references, things that people said about David, and his own words. When we're talking about legendary Arthurian literature, don't look for the solid best copy, because you're not going to find it. Arthurian literature evolved through the centuries and probably got more and more greatly exaggerated, but it really is fun to read and worth your time. We are reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight this week. It's 50 pages, it's all. And yes, you can listen to my read aloud. It's 5 different audio files, only about 106 minutes long total. This is 10% of your Q2 grade, and you have a list of vocabulary words that you've downloaded or that your teacher or parent has printed for you today, and they are due next week. They're due next week. When you give the vocabulary definition, please use a definition that fits in the context of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. If you look up a word online, now these words are all in the newest copy of the British Literature Glossary. So if you just printed up the 2022 copy, then these words are all in your glossary and you can look them all up under Gawain. Next week, we are going to be talking about Much Ado About Nothing and Shakespeare's sonnet. You'll turn in your Gawain vocabulary and you'll take a Gawain plot quiz to make sure that you understood what you read. And we will have an introduction into Shakespeare's world, which is really fun, and get into Much Ado About Nothing. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. What is it with this book? Does Sir Gawain provide a moral compass for the 14th century? Does his character tell young men in the 1300s, this is what you should be if you want to be noble and chivalrous and have a deep Christian spirituality? Is this what you should be? And I do believe that the answer is at least partially yes for that. Your copy may not look like this. My copy cover looks like this, an old artwork, some old artwork from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Arthurian romance, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, is extant in a late 14th century, so 1300s manuscript, with 3 other poems. The poem The Pearl, Purity, and Patience. All are written by the same author, who we call the Gawain poet. All the poetic pieces, except Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, deal with obviously Christian subject matter. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is the only one that's just Arthurian romance. It's not known why Sir Gawain, this Arthurian romance, was included in an otherwise religious manuscript. The Gawain poet is contemporary with Chaucer and Wycliffe. Wycliffe, you may see it spelled differently with 2 F's and an E, with 1 F, with 1 F and an E. Just get used to it. We remember we are dealing with a time period with John Wycliffe that there are no dictionaries. Ideals that we're going to see with the Gawain Knight, with Sir Gawain the Knight: nobility, the standard of nobility, chivalry, the ideal of courtly love, and the ideal of Christian spirituality. And will King Arthur's knight, Sir Gawain, live up to his code of chivalry and nobility? This is a test. Chaucer had developed iambic pentameter and rhyming couplets for the Canterbury Tales. Chaucer did not utilize alliteration, where you use the same sound all over and over. The lazy leopard leaped lightly in the lane. That's alliteration. The Gawain poet is writing with Old English alliterative verse, so alliteration is not dead. Chaucer didn't use it, but the Gawain poet uses it. So alliteration is not dead. Chaucer was from London, which is in the south of Britain. And the Gawain poet is from northern Britain. And this may also have to do with the alliterative style missing in one and present in the other. The Gawain poet demonstrates that the Old English alliterative literary style had not disappeared, except maybe from London. This poem is told in 4 parts. In the poem are found 3 common to medieval literature literary devices. Believe it or not, a common feature is a beheading threat or a game. And of course, this is the way pagans killed their enemies, was often getting beheaded. A hero's temptation. This is common in Arthurian literature. Will our hero, how will he do with this temptation? Will he come out of this temptation, away from this, victorious, or will he fail? A hero who accepts a challenge in anticipation of winning something. As the story progresses, the 3 plots are woven with expert literary success. Our knight, Sir Gawain, the hero, is going to be tested for his honesty, his spirituality, his loyalty, and his chastity, which would be purity. Will he remain pure and honest and spiritually still connected with the Lord? Will he be loyal to his master and to himself? The poem begins and ends with references to the myth of Britain's connection to the ancient city of Troy. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but we have to cover Troy to get to Gawain. Britain's Trojan founder, Brutus, was descended from the Trojan hero Aeneas, and the Trojan hero means he's from Troy. The hero Aeneas, some say the word Britain even comes from Brutus's name. Now, Paris, the prince of Troy, and he is usually shown to be a little bit of a ladies' man. Paris, the prince of Troy, stole, or maybe borrowed or kidnapped, or maybe she ran away from him, Helen of Sparta, which is part of Greece, but Sparta is on the Peloponnese, the part of Greece that kind of dangles like a glove or a hand. But she was stolen from her husband, King Menelaus, who is the king of Sparta. And the Spartans, if you remember, we even use a Spartan as an adjective to mean a rough and tough. Many sports teams in high schools are named the Spartans, and that implies that they are able to, that they are warriors, is what it implies. Now, King Menelaus should have known that his wife Helen would be trouble. Every eligible bachelor wanted to marry Helen because she's a demigoddess. She's half goddess and half human. So she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And apparently every man wants to marry the most beautiful woman in the world. But Helen's beauty turned out to be a curse for her. Menelaus, her husband, the king of Sparta, won her father's favor and got to marry her. But every other suitor had promised that if they didn't win her, they would protect her if anything ever happened to her, as was very likely and did happen. Now, the problem, Menelaus was angered and his honor was on the line. In the ancient pagan worldview, honor was everything. And to be dishonored, for example, to have the Prince of Troy come over to Sparta on the Peloponnese of Greece, and Troy is up on the northwestern coast of what we now call Turkey or Asia Minor. So to have the Prince of Troy come over and steal your wife or convince her to run away with him, that was a shame for King Menelaus, and that was a public dishonoring. So the king soon raised a Greek expedition of 1,000 ships to sail for Troy. And of course, it did take 10 years for him to gather everybody. And there are incredible stories about all the warriors that King Menelaus went to visit to convince them to go to Troy to get Helen back. And for the most part, they were promised treasures and riches and things like that. There is a great edition. It's called Black Ships Before Troy. And this is the story of the Iliad by Rosemary Sutcliffe. It's the perfect introduction to the Iliad. If you read that book, then you'll be ready for classical lit next year, studying the Iliad, reading Richmond Lattimore's translation from the Greek into English. Now, some Greek kings went willingly and some went reluctantly, but there was much to gain from sacking the famed Troy. Excavation levels there have shown at least 12 layers of civilization, destroyed, built on top of each other, destroyed, built on top of each other. So there was probably a lot to get when they sack Troy, when they destroy Troy and steal everything. Now, this edition of the film, this film is rated R for nudity. So I would never suggest this film. I have an edited version of this that we're able to watch, but also the ending is incorrect. The storyline, they've changed it, they've modernized it. So even if you saw an edited version of this edition of Troy from May 2004, it doesn't follow the story. The Trojan War continued for 10 years. So they are on the beach. The Greeks all get together, take their 1,000 ships, and go over to what we now call Turkey. And they camp out on the beach. And every day they go fight against the Trojans, but the Trojans have a great big wall around their city, Troy. So while they're camped there, they go around and sack the little cities that don't have big walls around them to steal food and women and all the things they want to eat and to use. And this war is a 10-year war. The Trojan War continued for 10 years, wavering back and forth with the Greeks camped on the beach outside of the city walls. And that's the story of Homer's Iliad. After 10 long years, and the death of the Trojan hero Hector and the Greek hero Achilles, the Greeks win the war. The Greeks sack Troy. That means they destroy it, committing many atrocities against the gods and goddesses by desecrating temples and priestesses and things like that, killing the king when he's hanging onto the altar, and you're not supposed to do that. Very similar to the biblical altar in the Old Testament. These atrocities against the gods require revenge. So the gods are mad at them. You can see Poseidon standing there in this beautiful artwork holding his trident. All the gods and goddesses are mad at different ones of the Greeks and the Trojans. Many Greeks are going to perish on that long journey home. They're just not going to make it. One, Agamemnon, is going to be murdered by his own wife in his own bathtub when he returns. And the return is the story of Homer's Odyssey, and then a whole bunch of multiple Greek tragedies. But that's another story, that's another class, that's classical lit. Come back next year for more. Helen and King Menelaus live happily ever after in Sparta. Yes, in the Iliad and Odyssey and in Greek tragedy, Helen can't help it that she's part goddess and the most beautiful woman in the world. And so she gets off, she goes back to King Menelaus, her husband, and I suppose says, I'm sorry. And he says, that's okay, honey, you can't help it. I don't know. It's not her fault that she's so beautiful that she provokes men. They live happily ever after. After the war, some of the Trojans, so these are the guys at Troy, some of the Trojans leave under the leadership of the Trojan hero Aeneas. Now, Aeneas is a very minor character in the Iliad, but in the Aeneid, the Roman version of the story, and the Romans felt they descended from Troy, Aeneas is quite the prince, and it's a big deal. So they leave under the leadership of the Trojan hero Aeneas, and the story continues. This is famous medieval artwork, but there are also statues, all types of vases showing this particular event. This is the Trojan prince and hero Aeneas. He's carrying his old father Anchises over his back. He's holding on to his son Ascanius by the hand, and he doesn't have a hand left for Creusa, his wife. So she's following behind as they escape the burning city of Troy. So Aeneas is quite the Trojan hero, and the Romans thought they were descended from the Trojans. So they made a deal about Aeneas. We're still getting to Britain. Here we see Aeneas carrying again on a vase his father and son. Aeneas's wife, Creusa, remember? She's right behind him, but she was accidentally left behind in the burning city. When he turns to enter the burning city once more in search of Creusa, you can imagine he's thinking, I'll get you, honey. I'll leave my dad and my son here. I'm coming through the burning and all the soldiers and all of that. I'm coming through to get you. But her ghost appears. You know, Aeneas, ooh, ooh, it's too late. I'm already dead. So that's her ghost there on the left on this vase. And she says, don't worry, I'm already dead. Once you get to Italy, where you're going to found the city of Rome, you can get a new wife. And that's very important for Aeneas, that he needs a new wife and can marry somebody when he gets to Italy, and that gives him more of a claim over Italy. The Trojan hero Aeneas, here he is again. You can see his father on his back as he fights his way out of the city and with his son and his wife. And even Aeneas is a son of the human man Anchises, and then of the goddess Venus. And so he is also a demigod. Aeneas's son Ascanius is a normal human. He's the father to Silvius, and Silvius is the father to Brutus of Britain, and Brutus is the man of whom it is possible that Britain was named after. Britain may have been named after this Brutus. And so now I've connected Troy to Britain for you. Try to remember that. That will never be on a quiz. That's just to make a connection for you. Brutus of Troy has no historical backing. He's legendary, found in the 12th century, the 1100s, account of Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey took the story from Livy, the historian Livy, and from Virgil's Aeneid. The boy Brutus was banished from Italy. He wandered the seas, and he founded first tours of Gaul, what we call France today, and then Britain. Here is a 53 BC denarius, the reverse, and you can see the word Brutus in the Latin, and here he is a hero, British King Brutus. Now, let's get back to King Arthur of Camelot. King Arthur is a legendary Romano-British leader who led the defense of the British Isles against the Anglo-Saxon invaders shortly after the Romans left in AD 400. Remember last week we talked about the Roman invaders, the Romans leaving in AD 400, and everybody else moved back in. King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table are a central component of British Navy folklore. In various Arthurian tales and poems, Arthur appears as a mighty warrior. He defends Britain against human and supernatural enemies. And you can see this says Magnus Arturus Rex, so the magnificent or the great King Arthur. And that's Sir Lancelot. King Arthur ruled the Knights of the Round Table. The Round Table implied that all who sat in conference were equals. That's the idea. No one was at the head of the table. Even the king was not at the head of the table. They're all equal. Arthur's father, King Uther Pendragon, had died. Britain was without a king. The land was divided between numerous lords. The wizard Merlin tells of the sword in the stone called, the sword is called Excalibur, because of course swords, just as in Beowulf, they have names. which can only be pulled from the rock by the true king of Britain. And so, of course, Arthur is the only one who can pull out Excalibur. Merlin crowns him King of Britain, and there he is. In another version of the sword story, Arthur is given the sword by the Lady of the Lake. The Lady of the Lake. He is out, and this hand wrapped in samite rises up, this woman, the Lady of the Lake, and gives him Excalibur, the sword. And you know that at the end of Arthur's life, we read this last week, Arthurian literature, that at the end, he sends his knight to go throw the sword into the lake, and the lady's hand once again raises up to take Excalibur and then goes down. Now, this is supposedly the area in Wales where King Arthur, if there was a real King Arthur, would have been located. Arthur builds Camelot, and he's in peace for many years, Queen Guinevere. And you have a map that shows this section of Wales on page 51 of your syllabus. In much later editions, Arthur is betrayed by Lancelot, a favored knight who has an affair with the queen, violating his vows as a knight. Remember those vows? What vows of a knight? Nobility, chivalry, courtly love, Christian spirituality, honesty, loyalty, chastity, purity. He's violating all of these things. Guinevere is sentenced to death. Lancelot rescues her, and war breaks out. And of course, these are later editions. The earliest Arthurian literature does not have Lancelot a traitor. Today's romantics enjoy that she has this affair and finds her true love, who apparently was not Arthur. And Christians have issues with that because we prefer her to remain faithful to her husband, and we prefer the knight to follow all the rules of knighthood. Historians tried to tie the legend of King Arthur to real history without success. So what was he, legend or history? There's no way to know at this point. Open your Dover edition, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and let's take introduction. It's after the siege and the assault of Troy, when that burg or city was destroyed and burnt to, and the traitor tried for reason, the noble Aeneas and his kin sailed forth to become princes and patrons of well nigh all of the Western Isles. And this is a coin of Julius Caesar from about 40 CE, so just a couple of years before Julius Caesar is assassinated. But here is a picture of Aeneas carrying Anchises palladium, which is an idol. And legend said that wherever that palladium went, they would found a new city. And that's how Aeneas supposedly took that idol from Troy, took it all the way to Italy, and was able to claim himself to be the founder of Rome. Romulus built Rome and gave to the city his own name, which it bears even to this day. Anticius turned him to Tuscany and raised him up dwellings in Lombardy. So there are all types of legend. You'll see things all around Rome, the she-wolf that finds Romulus and Remus, and then later the two boys fight, and they're saved. They're actually found in a basket in a river, in a Tiber River that gets washed up on shore, and the she-wolf finds them and nurses them and raises them up, marks the Feast of Lupercal, which is wolf. So later they get mad at each other, and Romulus kills Remus, and that's why Rome is called Rome and not Rheme. But that's another class. That's class I'll lit next year. And Felix Brutus, here's Brutus for the first time, sailed far over the French and founded the kingdom of Britain, wherein have been war and waste and wonder and bale oft times since. And in that kingdom of Britain have been wrought more gallant deeds than in any other. But of all British kings, Arthur was the most valiant, as I have heard tell. Therefore I set forth a wondrous adventure that fought in his time. And if ye will listen to me, But for a little while I will tell it even as it stands in story, stiff and strong, in the letter as it hath long in the land. King lay at Camelot upon a Christmas tide, with many a gallant lord and lovely lady, and all the noble brotherhood of the Round Table. This is from our story, page 1. There they held rich revels with gay talk and jest, one while they would ride forth to joust and tourney, and to the court to make carols, for there was the feast holden 15 days with all the mirth that devised. Song and glee to hear in the daytime, and dancing at night. Halls and chambers were crowded with noble guests, the bravest of knights and the loveliest of ladies. And Arthur himself was the comeliest king that ever held a court, for all this fair folk were in their youth the fairest and most fortunate under heaven, and himself of such fame, hard now to name so valiant a hero. New Year's Day. Now the new year had but newly come in, and on that day a double portion was served on the high table to all the noble guests, and thither came the king with all his knights. When the service in the chapel had been sung to an end, greeted each other for the new year, and gave rich gifts, the one to the other, and they that received them were not wroth, that ye may well believe. And that is a litote, very similar to Beowulf, where we exaggerate something for an understatement, a litote. They were not wroth, that ye may well believe. They were not angry that they got these gifts. And wroth, of course, is one of your vocabulary words. And the maidens laughed and made mirth till it was time to get them to meet. Then they washed and sat them down to the feast in fitting rank and order. And Guinevere, the queen, gaily clad, sat on the high dais. Silken was her seat, with a fair canopy over her head, of rich tapestries of tars embroidered and studded with costly gems. A fair she was to look upon, with her shining gray eyes. A fairer woman might no man boast himself of having seen. But Arthur would not eat till all were served, so full of joy and gladness. He, even as a child, he liked not either to lie long or to sit long at meat. So he was, what do they today when you're hyperactive? He didn't like to lie long or to sit long at meat. So worked upon him his young blood and his wild brain. And another custom he had also that came of his nobility, that he would never eat upon an high day till he had been advised of some knightly deed or some strange and marvelous tale of his ancestors or of arms or of other ventures. So he doesn't ever eat until something exciting has happened or he gets in the story, or till some stranger knight should seek of him leave to joust with one of the Round Table, that they might set their lives in jeopardy one against another, as fortune might favor them. It's always fun to have a friendly little joust and see if you can kill one another on a holiday, as fortune might favor you, to set your life in jeopardy. Such was the king's custom when he sat in hall at each high feast with his noble knights. Therefore on that new year tide he abode fair of face on the throne, and made much mirth withal. Thus the king sat before the high tables, and spake of many things. And there good Sir Gawain was seated by Guinevere the queen, and on her other side sat Agravain a la Dourmain, which means of the hard hand. Both were the king's sisters' sons, and full gallant knights. So they were his nephews, Sir Gawain and Agravain. And at the end of the table was Bishop Baudwin, and Uwaine, Sir Urian's son, sat at the other side alone. These were worthily served on the dais, and at the lower tables sat many valiant knights. Then they bare the first course with the blast of trumpets and waving of banners, with the sound of drums and pipes, of song and lute, that many a heart was uplifted at the melody. Many were the dainties and rare the meats. So great was the plenty that they might scarce find room on the board to set on the dishes. Each helped himself as he liked best, and to each two were 12 dishes, with great plenty of beer and wine. And now I will say no more of the service, but that ye may know there was no lack. for there drew near a venture that the folk might well have left their labor to gaze upon. As the sound of the music ceased, and the first course had been fitly served, there came in at the hall door one terrible to behold, of stature greater than any on earth, from neck to loin so strong and thickly made, and with limbs so long and so great that he seemed even as a giant. And yet he was but a man, only the mightiest that might mount a steed, broad of chest and shoulders, and slender of waist, and all his features of like fashion. But men marveled much at his color, for he rode even as a knight, yet was green all over. He was clad in green with a straight coat and a mantle, that would be a coat above, and all decked and lined with fur was the cloth, and the hood that was thrown back from his locks and lay on his shoulders. Hose had he of the same green, and spurs of bright gold with silken fastenings richly worked, and all his vesture was verily green. Around his waist and saddle were bands with fair stones set upon silken work. 'Twere too long to tell of all the trifles that were embroidered thereon, birds and insects in gay gauds of green and gold. All the trappings of his steed were of metal of like enamel, even the stirrups that he stood in stained of the same, and stirrups and saddlebow alike gleamed and shone with green stones. Even the steed on which he rode was of the same hue, a green horse, great and strong, and hard to hold, and broidered bridle meet for the rider. The knight was thus gaily dressed in green, his hair falling around his shoulders. On his breast hung a beard as thick and green as a bush, and the beard and the hair of his head were clipped all round above his elbows. The lower part of his sleeves were fastened with a clasp in the same wise as a king's mantle or a king's cape. The horse's mane was crisp and plaited, so braided, with many a knot folded in with gold thread about the fair green, here a twist of the hair, here another of gold. The tail was twined in like manner, and both were bound about with a band of bright green set with many a precious stone. Then they were tied aloft in a cunning knot, whereon rang many bells of burnished gold. Such a steed might no other ride, nor had such ever been looked upon in that hall ere that time. And all who saw that knight spake and said that a man might scarce abide his stroke. So if he whacked at you, you were history. The knight bore no helmet, nor hauberk, nor gorget, nor breastplate, neither shaft nor buckler to smite, nor to shield. And those are all vocabulary words. You probably have your list in front of you. You can mark them in your book so you can find them later and look them up in your glossary under G for Gawain. But in one hand he had a hog bough, that is greenest when the groves are bare, and in his other hand an axe, huge and uncomely, a cruel weapon in fashion, if one would picture it. The head was an yard long, the head of the axe, the metal all of green steel and gold, the blade burnished bright with a broad edge, as well shapen to shear as a sharp razor. The steel was set into a strong staff, all bound around with iron, even to the end, and engraved with green and cunning work. A lace was twined about it that looped at the head, and all down the handle it was clasped with tassels on buttons of bright green, richly broidered. The knight rideth through the entrance of the hall, driving straight to the high dais, and greeted no man, but looked ever upwards. And the first words he spake were, "Where is the ruler of this folk? I would gladly look upon that hero and have speech with him." He cast his eyes on the knights and mustered them up and down, striving ever to see who of them was of most renown, who's the most famous. Then was there great gazing to behold that chief, for each man marveled what it might mean that a knight and his steed should have even such a hue as the green grass, not to mention that he rode his horse inside, and that seemed even greener than green enamel on bright gold. All looked on him as he stood, and drew near unto him, wondering greatly what he might be, for many marvels had they seen, but none such as this. and phantasm and fairy did the folk deem it. Therefore were the gallant knights slow to answer, and gazed astounded, and sat stone still in a deep silence through that goodly hall, as if slumber were fallen upon them. I deem it was not all for doubt, but some for courtesy, that they might give ear unto his errand. They want to hear what he has to say. Then Arthur beheld this adventurer before his high dais, and knightly he greeted him, for fearful was he never. Sir, he said, thou art welcome to this place. Lord of this hall am I, and men call me Arthur. Light thee down and tarry a while, and what thy will is, that shall we learn after. So sit down for a while. He's being friendly. Nay, quoth the stranger, so help me, he that sitteth on high, 'twas not mine errand to tarry any while in this dwelling, but the praise of this thy folk and thy city is lifted up on high, and thy warriors are holden for the best and the most valiant of those who ride mail clad to the fight. The wisest and the worthiest of this world are they, and well proven in all knightly sports. And here, as I have heard tell, is fairest courtesy. Therefore have I come hither, as at this time. Ye may be sure by the branch that I bear here, that I come in peace, seeking no strife. So he's carrying the holly. For I had willed to journey in warlike guise. I have it both home, hauberk and helm, shield and shining spear, and other weapons to mine hand. But since I seek no war, my raiment, my clothing, is that of peace. But if thou be as bold as all men tell me, wilt freely grant me the boon I ask. So I hear you'll give me the favor I ask. And Arthur answered, Sir Knight, if thou cravest battle here, thou shalt not fail for lack of a foe. So if he just wants to prove he's the fastest draw, that's what we've seen in a Western, then he can do it here. And the knight answered, Nay, I ask no fight. In faith, here on the benches are but beardless children. Were I clad in armor on my steed, there is no man here might match me. Therefore I ask in this court but a Christmas jest, for that it is Yuletide and New Year, and there are here many fain for sport. Many people here who are fain for sport, willing, glad to have a sport. If anyone in this hall holds himself so hardy, so bold, both of blood and brain, as to dare strike me one stroke for another, I will give him as a gift this axe, which is heavy enough, in sooth, to handle as he may list, and I will abide the first blow, unarmed as I sit. If any might be so bold as to prove my words, let him come swiftly to me here, and take this weapon. I quit claim to it. He may keep it as his own, and I will abide his stroke firm on the floor. Then shalt thou give me the right to deal him another. The respite of a year and a day shall he have. Now haste, and let's see whether any here dare say aught. Now, if the knights had been astounded at the first, yet stiller were they all, high and low, when they had heard his words. The knight on his steed straightened himself in the saddle, and rolled his eyes fiercely round the hall. Red they gleamed under his green and bushy brows. He frowned and twisted his beard, waiting to see who should rise, and when none answered, he cried aloud in mockery, What, is this Arthur's hall, and these the knights whose renown hath run through many realms? Where are now your pride and your conquests, your wrath and anger and mighty words? Now are the praise and the renown of the Round Table overthrown by one man's speech, since all keep silence for dread, ere ever they have seen a blow. They're all sitting here in dread, and they've never even seen a blow. With that, he laughed so loudly that the blood rushed to the king's fair face for very shame. He waxed wroth. What does that mean? Angry. He waxed wroth, as did all his knights, and sprang to his feet, and drew near the stranger, and said, Now, by heaven, foolish is thy asking, and thy folly shall find its fitting answer. I know no man aghast at thy great words. Give me here thine axe, and I shall grant thee the boon, the favor thou hast asked. Lightly he sprang to him, and caught at his hand, and the knight, fierce of aspect, alighted down from his charger. Then Arthur took the axe, and gripped the haft, and swung it round, ready to strike. And the knight stood before him, taller by the head than any in the hall. He stood and stroked his beard and drew down his coat. No more dismayed for the king's threat than if one had brought him a drink of wine. Then Gawain, who sat by the queen, leaned forward to the king and spake, I beseech ye, my lord, let this venture be mine. Would ye but bid me rise from this seat and stand by your side, so that my liege lady thought it not ill, then would I come to your counsel before this goodly court. For I think it not seemly, when such challenges be made in your hall, that ye yourself should undertake it, while there are many bold knights who sit beside ye. None are there, methinks, of readier will under heaven, or more valiant in open field. I am the weakest, I wot, and the feeblest. I am the weakest, I wot, I think, and the feeblest of wit, and it will be the less loss of my life, if ye seek sooth. For save that ye are mine uncle, naught is there in me to praise. So the only thing praiseworthy about me is that you're my uncle, King Arthur. No virtue is there in my body, save your blood. And since this challenge is such folly that it beseems ye not to take it, and I have asked it from ye first, let it fall to me. And if I bear myself ungallantly, then let all this court blame me. Then they all spoke with one voice that the king should leave this venture and grant it to Gawain. All right, let's take a look at our Gawain vocabulary. It is due next week. I left you off hanging in the story. I chose that spot perfectly. I think you're going to enjoy Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Remember, what is a knight all about? He's all about nobility. He's all about chivalry. So he's super polite. He's all about courtly love, which is to, doesn't mean that he's in love with his king's lady. Well, it could be, but he wouldn't ever do anything about it. And it is a very high estimation of women and his Christian spirituality. It's very important. He has to be honest. He has to be spiritually a Christian, and he must be loyal, and he must be chaste. So he can't have an affair with his king's wife. He has to be chaste. He has to be faithful and pure. These vocabulary words are due session 10. They are all in your glossary under the title of Gawain. Yes, you need a cover sheet. Please do your best. These vocabulary words that we see in Gawain, you are also going to see in Shakespeare. Many of these words will show up again in Shakespeare. They're not done yet, and they will show up in the King James Version of the Bible. And they will come up if you read other Arthurian legends and fun stories. These words will all be there, and so you need to get these words into your own vocabulary. This list is meant to be defined in context, so choose the definition that fits the context where it's found in the story. And of course, best would be in the glossary. If you look that up further in a dictionary or an online dictionary, make sure that the definition fits the context where you found it in the story. All definitions must be written in complete sentences, and you are turning in your vocabulary words next week. On page 2 is the word wrath. On page 6 is the word boon. These are the page numbers in your Dover edition. And do you remember what wrath means? To be wrath is to be angry. Boon, feign, what? If someone is wroth, they are, yes, they're angry. They have wrath in their heart. They are angry. If someone requests that you grant them a boon, they are asking for, yes, a favor. The Green Knight is fain to take a blow from Sir Gawain. The Green Knight is, what would we say today? What does he want to do? He wants to. He wants to take a blow. He will gladly take a blow. Get used to the word feign. Parsing modern verbs, you did have a handout. If you printed it up, the verb to be is highly irregular, even in modern English. Think about it. In present tense, we say I am, you are, he, she, or it is. And in the plural, we say we are, you are, or they are. That's an irregular verb. It is different. You simply have to memorize it. And the past tense, we say I was, you were, he, she, or it was. And then in the plural, we say we were, You were or they were. And when we use you, Y-O-U, we don't know if that is plural or singular because they are the same. And that is the advantage to other languages where you know, for example, in Greek for the New Testament, you know whether the you is singular or plural, and that helps with theology. But back to English. Parsing the verb wit. It's the first person singular what. Sir Gawain says to the Green Knight on the text, page 8, so the Dover edition text, page 8. He says to the Green Knight, by him that made me, I wot never where thou dwellest, nor know I thee, knight, thy court, nor thy name. What does that mean? I wot never where thou dwellest. It's quite a bit like Shakespeare. I know never where thou dwellest. In other words, I don't know where you live, and I don't know your name. The second person, he says, you wost not what to do. If you wost not what to do, parsing the verb wit, then what is it? You know not what to do. Do learn these. Excuse me. Do learn these and get these memorized. We actually saw these in the Canterbury Tales too, didn't we? Third singular person is what. She wot not what to do. So she knows not what to do. Third person singular. What about present plural, wit or white? We white not what to do. We're still parsing the verb wit. We white not what to do. We know not what to do. Good. Wit comes to us from the Old English weazen. Remember Old English, the English of Beowulf, from the Old English weazen, and means to exist, to know, to be aware of, or to understand. It is related to the Old Saxon whist, Old High German whist, and the Old Norse vist, because they always say vist. I shall use all my wit to win my way thither, and that I swear thee forsooth, and by my sure troth, in our Dover text on page 8. Here, wit means intelligence. I shall use all my intelligence to win my way thither, and that I swear thee forsooth, for certain, and by my sure troth, which is your promise, your honor, your everything. The word troth used to be in wedding vows. You would vow your troth. The wit here means intelligence. The English of the Bible will supply numerous illustrations of the use of whist and wot. And I love that sentence because in 1883, in a grammar of the English language, it was easy to just point people, well, just go to the Bible. Go to the Bible. The English of the Bible will supply numerous illustrations of the use of the word whist and wot. And of course, the King James Version, those have all been removed now. And from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, which is always abbreviated ISBE, the verb to wit in the King James Version is interchangeable with to know and is conjugated with a present what and a past whist. This inflection is derived from more complicated forms in the older English, and in post-Elizabethan times, so after Shakespeare pretty much, has become quite obsolete. Elizabeth died in 1603 and Shakespeare died in 1611. So the Elizabethan age, that's pretty much the age of Shakespeare. And it is obsolete, but it's not obsolete to us because we want to understand the King James English. We want to understand Chaucer. We want to understand the Gawain poet. We want to be able to understand these things. Wit, then, is simply knowledge, and witty is having knowledge, and that remains fairly pretty much the same today. Ah, my, what a witty remark. That means what a clever remark. Sometimes we think of witty as kind of funny, but it's more clever, having knowledge, knowing something. Although the noun and the adjective have become narrowly specialized in modern English when we say wit, even in Much Ado About Nothing, when Beatrice is trying to verbally slam Benedict, she will say, 4 out of his 5 wits went walking away, something like that. And the 5 wits means all of the knowledge, everything he's got in his brain. So we're going to see this again in Shakespeare. Even in Elizabethan English, however, the indicative of to wit was becoming displaced by know, and wot and wist together occur only 24 times in the King James Version. And I have yet to find those in my version. I need to find some type of an online dictionary of the King James Version and see if I can find where those still occur. So parsing the verb wit, I wot, thou wast, he, she, it wot. And the plural, we wot, thee wast, and they wot. But we're going to know these. Past tense, we see this in our text on page 22. To wist is replaced by to know. While the very obsolete expression in 2 Corinthians 8:1, the King James Version says, we do you to wit. And today that has been changed to, we cause you to know. But originally in the King James, it was, we do you to wit. We cause you to know, to wit, to know, has become in the Revised Version, we make known unto you. And of course, that's easier to understand, but just these samples of the 3 expressions of the same words will help you to understand wist and wit. And in our text, page 8, I shall use all my wit to win my way thither, and that I swear thee forsooth, and by my sure troth. Okay, wit means intelligence. Sooth here means truth. Troth means promise. My troth, by my troth. It means by my honor, I promise, by my faithfulness, everything that is in me. You pledge your troth when you get married. Your promise, your honor, your faithfulness, everything gets pledged. Troth comes to us from the Old English troth. Troth is used to represent one's promise to marry, one's word of honor, one's loyalty, one's pledge, or one's faithfulness. By my sure troth, text page 8, tells us the speaker is backing up this speech with his honor. It can also be used to promise truth. In troth, I tell thee, I will find thee. And the word leally in our text on page 9. And if you are reading along with me with your book, I hope you're reading with a highlighter or a pencil or a pen or something to mark all of these words. The Green Knight says to Sir Gawain, and seek leally till thou find me. So what do you think leally means? To seek leally means to seek honestly, truthfully, or faithfully. So the Green Knight tells Gawain, you have to really try hard to find me. And Gawain agrees. What about behove? To behove is to behoove. To behoove is to be needful or proper, to benefit, to be to your advantage, or to be ethically correct. For example, it behooves you to sit still in class. It behooves me to do my homework. So it behooves you, it is proper for you, it is ethically correct for you to sit still in class. And it behooves me to do my homework. It is proper, it's worthwhile to me, it's ethically correct. So learn behove. It is just another form of behoove, but learn this word. The Green Knight says to Sir Gawain in our Dover text, page 9, therefore it behoves thee to come, or to yield thee as recreant. Oh my goodness, okay, here's a bad word. If you are recreant, you are a coward, you are disloyal, you are untrue, you are base, and you are dastardly. To be recreant is to be the opposite of a knight, right? Because the knight, what are his pledges? To be loyal, to be true, to be brave, to be faithful, and to be good. Back on slide 6, we talked about nobility, chivalry, courtly love, and Christian spirituality. And on slide 10, we talked about honesty, spirituality, loyalty again, and chastity or purity. So no knight wants to be recreant, coward, base, dastardly. We need to resurrect all of these old words. And then we see the word zephyr. We picked this up in Chaucer for the first time, and we will also see this in Shakespeare. So learn this word. Zephyr is the god of the west wind. We see this in the Dover text, page 11. The gods of the east, the south, and the north winds were harsh, and they were created in mythology by the monster Typhon. And of course, that is the source of our word typhoon. Zephyr, the god of the west wind, is the mildest of the wind gods. So Zephyr is often the messenger of springtime in poetry. Wind gods were thought to father famous horses because they fly like the wind. For example, Zephyr was thought to be the father of Achilles' horses, who were they were more than horses. They were, as Achilles was a demigod, his horses were also demigod. Only a demigod could ride them. No normal person could ride them. And if you wanted them or tried to ride them, you're probably going to die. But the implication of Zephyr with a horse is that this is a really fast horse. Welcome. Learn this word. This is on our text, page 11. The angry wind of the welkin wrestles with the sun. So the wind of the what? The welkin is the sky. Do learn this word. It's a vocabulary word. Please learn the word. Now, what about Michaelmas? This talk in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Michaelmas was September 29. We are just about there. I am creating this on September, I believe it's September 25 today as I am creating. No, it is September 26 as I'm creating this video for you. The celebration of Michaelmas mentioned in the Dover text, page 12, is to honor the archangel Michael. So Michaelmas. Instead of Christmas, Michaelmas. In our story, Michaelmas is used as a time marker. It heralds the autumn or fall of the year. A modern writer might translate when the autumn moon was come in with warnings of winter, but it's, or we might say when the leaves change. But Michaelmas, September 29, what's going on September 29? Everything is turning to fall. Summer is over sometime the third week in September, and it's officially fall. And rather than using a calendar with specific days, they talk about the celebration of Michaelmas, and that tells us what time of the year it is. It is fall. What about All Hallows Day, which falls on November 1st? Yet till All Hallows Day, he lingered with Arthur. So from September 29 until November 1st, Gawain lingers with Arthur. It's been more than a year, and Gawain has something he must go do. And on that day, they made a great feast for the hero's sake. We read in the Dover text, page 12. All Hallows Day is also called All Saints' Day. The night before is All Hallowed Eve, or you may have grown up calling it Halloween. Now, whether or not you celebrate Halloween is of no consequence. All Hallows Day is being used here as a time marker. Once we get to Michaelmas, it's early fall. But once we get to All Hallows Day, it is later fall, and weather's going to start being an issue. I've given you pictures here on slide 120 of what some, especially in the Catholic faith, do on All Hallows Day. They go out the night, and that's, I think, where much of the legend of Halloween comes from. They go out and they put flowers and food on the graves. We have many Filipino relatives, and they still go to the graveyards and they take the favorite foods of the deceased and they leave those foods. I often wonder, what the graveyard caretakers think. I suppose they learned the traditions, but it is kind of interesting because normally Protestants don't do that. It's very much a Catholic thing, but it also is, some cultures also do this. So they make a big feast for him because they realize, Gawain, it's time for you to go and fulfill your quest. All Hallows Day is also called All Saints Day. And the night before is Hallowed Eve, which turns into Halloween. Now, if you believe Wikipedia, I always like to do a little thing on Halloween here. And what I try to do, I try to be really kind, because I know some of you dress up, and when you were little children, you dressed up and went door knocking for candies, and other families would be horrified. Absolutely. I would never have their children go knock on the doors of strangers for candy. So regardless of where your family falls in there, wouldn't you like to know a little bit about the tradition and where this all came from? Now, if you believe Wikipedia, which I generally do not completely, but they had a pretty good article. And they tell us development of artifacts and symbols associated with Halloween formed over time, encompassing customs of a medieval holy day, as well as contemporary cultures. The souling practice of commemorating the souls in purgatory with candle lanterns carved from turnips. So they weren't originally pumpkins, they were carved from turnips, became adapted into the making of a jack-o'-lantern. And that's what this is. It's a head carved from a turnip, and then you'd put a candle in there, and you would put this out, and the idea is to scare evil spirits away. This is a traditional Halloween turnip jack-o'-lantern from the early 20th century. These are in the 1900s, early 1900s, and this is still on display in Ireland. And of course, the equivalent today would be the pumpkin lantern. The American tradition of carving pumpkins was originally associated with harvest time in general, not becoming specifically associated with Halloween until the mid to late 1800s. And so pumpkins and carving pumpkins used to be just a fall thing, just as when you go to the pumpkin patch, when you go to the pumpkin patch. I read this book to my little granddaughter this afternoon, The Pokey Little Puppy and the Pumpkin Patch. And most of you have gone to the pumpkin patch. In fact, this is the time of year for applesauce donuts and hot apple cider and taking pumpkins home and carving them out and making pumpkin pie and having lanterns out on your porch to say, fall is here, fall is here. And some of you, like me, may have artificial pumpkins with little smiling faces to put out for the fall. In the Roman Catholic Church, the next day, All Souls Day, November 1, specifically commemorates the departed faithful who have not yet been purified and reached heaven. Now remember, this is the idea of purgatory again. So this is not a Protestant theology. This is a Catholic theology that these souls are waiting to get into heaven. And so part of the leaving the food and lighting the candles and saying prayers and things is the idea is all to get these people out of purgatory and into heaven. The origin of the Festival of All Saints, celebrated in the West, dates to May 13, 8609 or 610, when Pope, of course it was the Pope, Boniface IV, consecrated the Pantheon at Rome to the Blessed Virgin and all the martyrs. Now, Hadrian built the Pantheon. If you've ever been to Rome and walked through the Pantheon, it's this huge, massive, arched, domed building. And when Michelangelo designed St. Peter's, he made sure that his dome was 1 meter wider in diameter than the Pantheon, so that the church dome would be bigger than this pagan dome. And so you can see all the little niches in the photograph here in the Pantheon, built about AD 120. Hadrian is the guy that built all the walls and did lots of building and built all the aqueducts and things that are still around Rome if you ever get to go to Rome. But the Pantheon is very much pagan. And so the Pope consecrates it to the Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. And that way you don't have to tear it down. You just reuse the building. The current observance, November 1, probably originates from the time of Pope Gregory III, so a little later on, AD 700s, and was likely first observed on November 1st in Germany. This fact makes the connection of the All Saints Feast with the pagan festival Samhain, a Celtic festival, less likely since Samhain was an Irish pagan feast and not German. While many consider Halloween pagan, as far as the church, the Catholic Church is concerned, the date is simply the eve of the Feast of All Saints. Many customs of Halloween reflect the Christian belief that on the feast's vigil, we mock evil because as Christians, it has no real power over us. And thus people dress up as Satan and devils and things like that to mock evil and to scare it all away. And this is from churchyear.net. And I would guess that that's a very Catholic idea. I'm not going to tell you that's true. I have my doubts on this one, but it is interesting. And I do like to read differing opinions. And I hope you are of the same type who want to hear what are the various customs, where do we think they come from, and do we really know? And again, here's someone at Mom's headstone, placing candles and probably bringing flowers and possibly food, especially if they're Filipino. Various customs have developed related to Halloween. In the Middle Ages, poor people in the community begged for soul cakes, and upon receiving these cakes or donuts, they would agree to pray for departed souls. So you knock on the door and you say, may I have a soul cake, please? And I'll pray for your relative. So tell me the name of your uncle who's suffering in purgatory, waiting to see if he's going to heaven or hell, and I'll pray for him if you give me this cake. This is the root of our modern day trick or treat, the custom of masks and costumes developed to mock evil and perhaps confuse the evil spirits by dressing as one of their own. Now, whether you believe churchyear.net or not is not my business, but I do think this is interesting to think that possibly this is where the trick or treating idea came from. Then it would be a very Catholic idea, excuse me, that you would knock on someone's door asking for food, a poor person asking for food, and say, I will pray. Tell me who to pray for, and I will pray for them. And the idea that is that the more people that you can get to pray for this person, perhaps the sooner they will get out of purgatory. It's a very Catholic idea. Some Christians visit cemeteries on Halloween, not to practice evil, but to commemorate departed relatives and friends with picnics and the last flowers of the year. Some of my Filipino relatives take chairs and blankets and picnic feasts and go out on different days, celebrations, and on the person's birthday, on the anniversary of their death, on all types of occasions, and they have picnics out at the graveyard. And that's very common. My Filipino relative, one of them, when my younger brother passed away, we went to the graveyard to put flowers on my brother's grave, and she had us drive through McDonald's and get him a hamburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake. And she left those on his grave. And I've often wondered, I wonder what the groundskeepers think when they see milkshakes and hamburgers and fries, because doesn't that create trash for them to pick up, and wouldn't it attract rodents? But that's not part of the equation. In the Catholic Church, All Saints' Day is a holy day of obligation, meaning going to Mass on the date is required. It's a holy day of obligation. You have to go to Mass that day, unless you are really elderly or you're really sick. However, in the United States, All Saints' Day is not considered a holy day of obligation if it falls on Monday or Saturday, as well as having no obligation at all if you live in Hawaii. And I believe that says quite a bit about Catholicism. Apologies if you are Catholic. I do think it's important for us as Protestants to understand where some of these customs come from so that we can perhaps understand Catholicism. Perhaps you have a grandma or aunt or cousins who are Catholic, and aren't you better equipped if you understand what their thoughts are? The Feast of All Saints is a holy day of the church honoring all saints known and unknown. This is much like the American holidays, Veterans Day and President's Day, where many people are honored on one day. So you honor all the saints and all the people you know who have died. So it's the Feast of All Saints Day. While we have information about many saints and we honor them on specific days, there are many unknown or unsung saints who may have been forgotten or never been specifically honored. On All Saints' Day, we celebrate these saints of the Lord and ask for their prayers and intercessions. And of course, this is quite Catholic. Candles, flowers, and food. And so here is a beautiful cemetery all lit up at night with candles. You can't do that here in Oregon because you might start a forest fire, but you have candles and flowers and food, drinks, all types of things left for people who you love, or if you find a grave that is undecorated, so that perhaps all of their relatives have deceased and they have no one to decorate their grave and offer prayers for them, then you might also place candles and flowers on those graves and offer prayers for those people. What if they're still waiting around in purgatory? In our text, Michaelmas, and that's on page 12, Michaelmas marks fall, and All Hallows Day marks late fall. And that's why they have the mention of Michaelmas and All Hallows Day, just to say we started in late September and we end up in November. These two holy days mark times and seasons for the Gawain poet. He doesn't use a regular candle. He says it's early fall and then it's late fall, time for Gawain to get going. Now, other words that you need to understand that you're also going to see in Shakespeare. What is a burnie? A burnie, I was able to find on the internet, a burnie for sale. A burnie is a chainmail tunic. If you're wearing a chainmail tunic, someone may slash at you with a sword. They might be able to break your elbow or your shoulder or your breastbone or your neck, but they can't slice you in two. And you can buy this replica for a small fortune online. What is a baudric? Do learn this one. You need to know this. This is going to be in the Shakespeare play that we read, Much Ado About Nothing. A baudric is a belt. You wear it across one shoulder. It's usually to hold a sword, as here in Gawain, or even hold a drum so that you can play it as you march, or even as a bugle. When we get to Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, the baudric is a bugle. He'll talk about hanging a bugle in his baudric, and that's what this is. It's to hang things on, and this one can be yours for only $65 online. What is a vintail? And it ends up being spelled with an I and an E. I'm pointing that out for you. Look up vintail to find that this item is a scarf or flap of chainmail. So you wear this on top of your burney. The burney is a chainmail tunic, and this vintail is the scarf or flap chainmail that swings across the lower part of the helmet during battle. This protects your neck and your chin. You can purchase this at a shop online in the UK for under $100. Now, what about Gawain's pentangle? We look at a five-sided star like this, and we think, oh my goodness, this is witchcraft, but not in the time of the Gawain poet. This is not implying witchcraft. And we're going to learn in Gawain and the Green Knight about this pentangle. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, SGGK, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is the only Arthurian narrative in which Gawain carries a pentangle on his shield. Usually he has a golden eagle or a lion or a griffin, but Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is the first text to use the word pentangle in English. And I found this in my Oxford English Dictionary, looking under pentangle. The pentangle is a pentagram, just as what they use in witchcraft in today, in the 21st century, a five-sided star, and they would put, a circle around it and candles and light it and all that, satanic rituals. But it's not satanic here. It's a five-pointed star, and this raises the question of whether the pentangle has the magical associations that the pentagram has today. The anonymous author of Gawain gives Solomon from the Bible credit for developing the five-pointed star. So don't worry about that. Sir Gawain's pentangle on his shield is not a druid pentagram. It is not witchcraft. There's no evidence for interpreting the pentangle on Gawain's shield as a talisman, something used to ward off magic. In our culture, the pentagram is currently associated with magic and satanic worship. It's kind of like the German swastika. After World War II, the swastika is forever a reminder of Germany's attempt to cleanse, ethnic cleansing to get rid of all of the Jews. But before World War II, it was just a decoration. You see what is now called a swastika. You see that same design all over the mosaic floors in near Mount Vesuvius, the town that was buried in AD 79 by Mount Vesuvius. And the word's not going to come to me because I didn't put it on my PowerPoint. And you can go visit it. I've been there 3 times. Anyway, mosaic floors, these Roman mosaic floors had the swastika, but you wouldn't call it a swastika then. It's called a swastika now. The text clearly associates the pentangle on Gawain's shield as having Solomonic origins. So they think it's from the Bible, the medieval people did. The Gawain poet associates each of the 5 points of the pentangle with a set of 5 virtues that define Gawain. And this is really fascinating because you've got the 5 points, and this is to remind him 5 different things. He's supposed to be faultless in 5 senses, the senses of sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. So this is a perfect warrior. Remember, he's a perfect warrior. He's ideal in these natural gifts and in intelligence. And the second thing, his 5 fingers never failed him. So he is ideal in natural strength. And third, he holds faith in the 5 wounds that Christ bare on the cross as the creed tells. And so this would be the 2 nails in his hands, the 2 nails in his feet, and the crown on his head would count as 5. Archaeology, they have found evidences of crucifixion, and it does appear they used 1 nail for both feet. But this is Gawain. Let's give him a break. So Gawain is ideal in his faith. How do you teach correct theology to masses of illiterate people? When we are talking about the 1300s and 1400s, there are a lot of illiterate people. The Apostles' Creed provided correct theology to avoid heresy and to affirm faith for a mostly illiterate congregation. It's very similar to what we do in Sunday school or in Vacation Bible School. We teach songs and we put on plays so that these little children, who are mostly illiterate, can learn the story of Christ and God's love for us and learn the stories, learn about Jesus. And so we put them in songs. Well, they put this in the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, God's only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the 3rd day, he rose again. He ascended into heaven. He is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he will come again to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the holy universal church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. If you could teach that creed to people, they would be less likely to become heretics because they would have proper theology. This creed of creeds does not originate from the apostles, although it's called the Apostles' Creed. It originates from the first few centuries, though, and it reflects the theology formed by the earliest Christians. You can find Bible verses for every single phrase of the Apostles' Creed, and they're simply putting all of their theology into a creed, something that can be taught to people and they can memorize. In a time when most Christians were illiterate, oral repetition of the Apostles' Creed, along with the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments, helped preserve and transmit the faith of the Western churches and prevented heresy. We are all one step away from becoming heretics. Back to Gawain's pentangle. So each of those 5 points has a set of 5 virtues. So the 4th set of 5 is that he draws his strength from the 5 joys of Mary. What are the 5 joys of Mary? Well, they're very Catholic. The Annunciation, when the angel comes and tells her she's going to carry Jesus. The Nativity, the Resurrection, the Ascension, and the Assumption of, and that would be of Mary, which is very Catholic. And you can't find that in the Bible. And the 5th set of 5 virtues: frankness, fellowship, purity, courtesy, and compassion. So 5 sets of 5, all represented by Gawain's pentangle. Note that these are social, not religious virtues, and that Gawain's religious faith is defined in terms of popular theology as befits a knight rather than a priest. These 25 virtues, 5 times 5, would thus add up to a knight who is physically strong, who is devoted particularly to the Virgin Mary and to Christ, whose wounds are an apt focus for a knight whose purpose in life is to bleed for his Lord as Christ bled for his Lord, and who manifests the ideals of a courtly society, which is really amazing. Let's see, we have a couple more slides, we're almost done. A Gawain vocabulary. What about a loophole? What is a loophole? Well, if you ever get a chance to go to Europe, we were able to go to London for a week. What is a loophole? Well, you can see one on this castle. We've been talking about castles. The loophole looks like a very narrow, tall window. It's a way out. We use it only metaphorically today. What is a loophole? That it's metaphorically, if you find a loophole, you find a way out. It looks like it's impenetrable. You can't get out, but you find a loophole. And that way you can get out. But what is a loophole? It is this, it's this long, narrow hole, so that when you are being attacked, an archer can stick his arrow out there and shoot at people who are trying to attack the castle, but no one can shoot in because the castle walls are very, very thick. It would be almost impossible to shoot in from down below. You'd have to get up almost even with the window to actually shoot an arrow into it. That's what a loophole is. What about lever? This is in our text on page 26. Look up leaf, L-I-E-F, because that's another form of this word when you start parsing it to find that this means willingly. He would as lief, or lever. He would as lief. We will see in Shakespeare, I would as lief, and that means I would as gladly. I would as willingly. You're glad or desirous to do something. And fain means the same thing. I would gladly do this. So do learn fain and learned leaf. I don't believe we'll see lever anywhere in Shakespeare, but we certainly will see leaf. I am glad or desiring or willing to do this. And that is our last slide. I would advise your parent, your teacher, the facilitator of this class, that as you go through and grade the Canterbury Tales this week, that I would suggest the teacher or the mom read with a highlighter in your hand. And when you come across an exceptional answer in the Canterbury Tales, highlight it and mark it up so that when you hand it back to the students next week or the week after that, you could take 10 or 20 minutes in class and read some of the most amazing of the answers, those who work very hard and come up with something and you realize, oh my, they're saying it better than I can say it. Read those out loud. Do have the students read their own work if they are willing. Or what I sometimes do is I don't hand them back before I hand the Canterbury Tales back. I have sections highlighted in almost every student's paper, and I read that wondrous answer. And then I say, thank you, Mark, or thank you, Judy, and hand the paper back to them. And then their classmates all realize, oh, you wrote that. I only wrote 5 words. I wish I had written that. And I would suggest that you do this regularly, that if you have exceptional student work, do take some time in class to have the students read these out loud so that they can, it gives us purpose for working harder, knowing that if we do something exceptional, that our classmates will also get to enjoy that from us. Remember, your vocabulary words are due next week. You have a complete read aloud by me. We actually started part of that today for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and that your vocabulary words are all defined in context in the glossary under Gawain in the G's. And the Lord bless you, and I will see you next week.